dames en heren, ladies and gentlemen. Nice that you're all here. My name is Saras. I'm from this university. On behalf of our partners, meaning the University of Twente, Saxo Center for Entrepreneurship, Kennis Park Center, Saxo University of Applied Sciences and Venture International, we welcome you this morning very warmly. You are here, maybe you don't know, because of the fact we had a project, my colleague, and I, with colleagues of you, colleagues from the Saxo University, from some secondary and educational schools, high schools, and also with the university teachers of the Twente University, how to get education more enterprise. How we can get more enterprise and entrepreneurship into education. And one of the things came out was principles of effectuation. And this gave us a great idea to ask Saras to come here and take you and join you with the story she has to tell. I welcome not only colleagues of this university, I also welcome colleagues of secondary education, also colleagues of universities in the Netherlands. We have some guests from Germany. All have a nice welcome. Thank you for coming here and for joining us today with us. I have only two technical messages. First is, please switch off your mobile phones. No sound. No sound. It's okay when you do so. We have a network, sexual guest networks, and we can your email and Twitter account, whatever you like, you can use. But please, no sound, it interferes with. A lot of colleagues and students cannot be here. That's why we make some small films. This will be a web lecture, and it will be available afterwards for everyone online, so you can look back at what's happening. The second message is that after the Saras is ready with you, I have some more technical logistic aspects. So, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to the retired professor of entrepreneurship, Sarasvathy.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let me get started. I already warned the videographer that I'm going to walk around. I'm not much good at standing in front of the audience and then lecturing to people. So if you're expecting a lecture, you are in trouble. So first of all, let me see, raise your hands if you are students. All right, a lot of students, wonderful, welcome. I will admit you're a student if you're going to pay. All right, very good. So I want to ask you, how many of you are already entrepreneurs? Okay, a few people are already entrepreneurs. You are not an entrepreneur yet.
Yes, I am.
You are an entrepreneur. I didn't see you raise your hand.
Yeah, I did.
You did?
The other one.
Okay. All right. What about you?
No.
You're not an entrepreneur. What are you doing here? What do you want to know?
I'm in a startup transaction.
You are, pardon?
Startup.
So you do want to start up?
Yes.
Okay, so you want to be an entrepreneur, you're not an entrepreneur yet.
Yes.
Okay, what's stopping you?
I'm not going to start because my idea is not ready.
Oh, his idea is not ready. Okay. What about you? Are you an entrepreneur already? Are you a student?
I'm not a student, I'm a teacher.
Okay.
And I didn't have the guts in the past.
So there's somebody whose idea is not ready, somebody didn't have the guts. Do you have the guts now?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know yet. We will figure out today, right? Anybody else who's a student who would like to be an entrepreneur but you haven't started yet? Should I assume everybody else has started? Have you started a company? You look like a student. Why haven't you done it yet?
I'm still in college, so I want to finish that.
So, have you heard of Bill Gates?
Yeah, I heard of it.
Did he finish college?
No.
So why are you trying to finish college?
Smart move.
Ah, smarter than Bill Gates for sure. Yeah, virtually everybody is. Don't worry. All right. Anybody else? Are you a student here?
Yes, I'm an exchange student.
You're an exchange student. Would you like to be an entrepreneur?
I'm thinking about it, but I don't know yet.
Okay. Why haven't you started yet? Why don't you know yet?
Somehow I started because I started to think about the idea and I started to gather information about it.
Okay.
But I didn't really practice yet.
Aha. So, okay, you haven't actually done, so you're thinking like, how do I actually do this? You're struggling with that. Anybody else who would like to start a company who hasn't? You know, if you don't talk, I'm going to come to you and ask you. So, all right. How about you? Would you like to be an entrepreneur? Have you started one?
Maybe, but I'm studying.
Yeah. What are you studying? Podiatry. But you would like to be an entrepreneur? What do you want to do with podiatry? Man, I could use more comfortable, beautiful shoes if you could build them for me.
That's not for me.
Why not?
Only
More doctors have built products that are actually very, very good to use, right? So,
but we only make the sole.
okay.
Inside of the shoe.
Oh, okay. So you'll make only the inside of the shoe. That's good enough for me. You know, outside of the shoe, we can have a good designer.
We can talk after you.
Very good. But why haven't you started a company yet? Just because you're studying? Is that why?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other reasons that people who would like to start a company haven't started yet? Anybody else wants to say something? Yes? Did I see your hand? Yeah, if you move, you're in trouble.
Maybe because other reasons not to start.
Such as?
Or something might be a reason.
Okay. So maybe it's not the right time in some ways. Okay? Absolutely. Any other reasons anybody wants to talk about? Okay. Very good. I get to go around the world and talk to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs educators. I have no idea what I did to deserve this luck, but I am very, very fortunate, which is a good thing to have as an entrepreneur. And I had been an entrepreneur before I came into academia. So when I came into academia, I really wanted to understand what should I be teaching if I'm going to teach entrepreneurship, right? And I'm going to tell you about that in a few minutes. But when I get to go around the different countries and different groups of people, I ask the same question. You know, if you'd like to be an entrepreneur, why haven't you started? If you don't want to be an entrepreneur, that's perfectly fine. You know, I have no problems with that because entrepreneurs need other people, right? Who need to invest with them, who need to work for them and so on. So that's perfectly fine. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you haven't started, when you ask the question, typically people give 4 kinds of reasons, right? They'll say, I don't have an idea, right? They'll say, I don't have the resources, whether it's time, money, or whatever. I don't know what to do, right? And I just don't have the guts. I'm afraid to fail, right? It's very interesting and very human that it doesn't seem to matter where you go and who you talk to. You get these 4 reasons over and over again. And in entrepreneurship education, if we actually want to teach people to become entrepreneurs for whatever reason that we might care about, we need to give our students a way to tackle these 4 problems, right? We need to be able to tell them, how do you know you have the right idea or your idea is ready, or how many resources or correct stage in life do you need? How do you get guts, right? Guts is actually sometimes more difficult to get than money, right? And then of course we are to teach them what to do and how to do it and what are some better and worse ways to do it. So I spent like the last 15 years of my life trying to understand this in an academic sense through research, but also build on my own experience as an entrepreneur. So that's what we are going to do today. Try to kind of deal with these 4 questions as educators or as potential entrepreneurs. But just to get us started, let's think a little bit about why do we care so much about entrepreneurship? What is entrepreneurship going to get us? And we carried along like for 10,000 years without worrying about entrepreneurship, and now all of a sudden everybody is talking about entrepreneurship all the time. You are nodding, yes. Why do you think people are suddenly caring about entrepreneurship?
I think it's mostly because a lot of people feel that the world is closer to them now. More makeable. They see a lot more what people do in the world.
Yeah.
So it used to be big corporations, big companies, and now you see a lot of people doing things through social media, through
Correct.
all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Just the fact that more people are actually able to do things. Have you thought of where did that come from? Where did that come from? Like, think about history. Think about, human history. Like, where did that come from? This idea that we can actually do stuff.
I think it's been around forever.
Forever.
That's my thing.
How old are you?
I'm 30, so.
Has it really been around forever? That you and I, chances are, if we met in the 18th century, do you think I would have felt I could make anything I wanted?
That's true, but I mean the sense of people being able to build when they have a sense of wanting to build something. That's
The wanting
exactly,
is very old, but the being able to, right, is a very, very interesting issue. I went to South Africa this summer, and as late as 1985, 1990, people of color, especially the darkest color, right, they were not allowed to own businesses. I mean, we take it for granted. Everybody is able to do it, but I just want us to start by looking at history a little bit and thinking it's really not. I know it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here, to see all kinds of people in the room. Although I think you do need more, females. So the first entrepreneurial assignment, some of you guys, I'm sure you can go get some women in the room, or women, however. So I just wanted to kind of start there and think about what it took to even make this possible, that I'm here and you are here and we can have a conversation about it and we can be completely optimistic that it's possible to do this, right? We are here and it's exciting because people feel that they can actually do that. So if you go take a look at it, if you think about almost until the 17th century, whether you're looking at individual human beings or whether you look at countries or societies, for the most part, GDP, life expectancy, per capita income was all like very similar. There were variations, but the variations were not that large, right? We were all in the same boat to some extent. Less than 4% of humanity had any freedom at all, any choice to do anything. And if you think that number seems weird, just think 50% of human beings are women, and we didn't have anything. And then there were a whole bunch of 46% of men, right? They also didn't have. So you had this thing of a very, very few people who had access to all the resources, all the power, and rest of the people were kind of peasants for the most part, right? Or on the kind of drifting into whatever is possible, what comes your way. So if you just start, what happened around that time, when you think about this is one story. You can come up with many, many different reasons why and how we move to a point where this is even feasible, and we still have a long way to go. But if you go to the point, this guy, is he a handsome guy or what? Anyway, his name is Francis Bacon, and even before Francis Bacon, El-Hamdi in Arabia, for example, had talked about it and written about it. But somehow, when this book came out, this kick-started a movement, right? Francis Bacon basically wrote this book called Novum Organum, where he was arguing that there is a method to science, right? Before that argument, for the most part, who were the scientists? They were usually considered some real genius. They'll say men who could read the signs of nature, right? Or there were rich people, who collected butterflies or star charts or whatever, and it was a kind of a hobby. And then there were a lot of what they call tinkerers, right? Potters and masons and people who did stuff, who might, in the doing, invent something, right? So there was no idea that there is a method here, that it is systematic, and we can actually teach it. But once that idea came, people started teaching it not just to potential scientists, right? We don't pick who are going to be Einstein, you're going to be a dummy, so you get to learn science. We don't do that. We actually teach science to everybody, right? But we still don't teach entrepreneurship to everybody. But one of the things you want to think about it, how did something like this idea of science, this idea of choice, how did that actually move us to this point where we feel we can do anything for the most part, right? So to take a look at that, take a look at what science enabled in a way, right? Because here you go, when you actually think about the 1820s, there was no middle class, right? There was practically no middle class. As I said, it was all like very rich people with a lot of power and then peasants for the most part. But over the years, we have built a middle class of the labor market. That's why most of us are probably middle class, which means we have access to basic resources, we are not afraid of where our next meal is coming from, and we have education. Right? This at least has become possible, and it's still not possible for a lot of people in the world, but it has been increasing so that it has become at least a hope for everybody on earth, that it's possible. We can at least do that, right? So now you think about, if you start thinking about entrepreneurship the same way, that this is something systematic, something teachable, that everybody can learn. You know, Bill Gates is not the only smart man on earth, right? And it's questionable whether he's actually as smart as everybody thinks he is, or it's just the money, right? Yeah, nothing against Bill Gates, by the way. But when somebody is successful and rich, I was just telling my friends from Russia here, you know, when somebody is very successful, you should always make fun of them. You know, whether it's power, money, or whatever. So that's why I make fun of him. So when you actually think about this, you want to think about what is possible if we actually took that approach to entrepreneurship, right? Not just think about it as starting a business and, you know, here's how you make a lot of money, or here's how you become Bill Gates. But instead, we actually say that is a way to think about problems in the world. And you can solve problems in such a way that it also creates value and jobs and everything for a lot of people, and also makes you rich along the way. And that's great, right? So if you actually think about that and you teach that to everybody, not just to potential entrepreneurs, what could become possible? Let me just give you kind of a practical dream, right? Not an idealistic dream, but a practical dream. So if you think about this for a second, think about co-creating a future through the entrepreneurial method. Take a look at this, right? In most economies, the most ventures are going to be tiny. It's going to be 1-person, 2-person ventures, right? And then there are going to be very, very, very few companies that grow very large over time, right? So there's going to be, so we think about this would be the middle class. But if you think about where do we actually spend the money, because we believe entrepreneurship is kind of the future and this is important and all of us have to do this, and we are, you know, beginning to educate. If you think about the money, most money is spent up here trying to get people to start ventures, or there's a lot of money chasing so-called Bill Gateses, right? So-called like the gazelles, or who is going to become the next billion-dollar company, the next Facebook, the next Alibaba. And so there's a lot of money there. But if you look at the jobs, right, some of the reasons why we really want to keep this trend going, right, this is extremely important for human beings and for history itself, most jobs come from here. And the interesting question is, why aren't we doing anything there? And that's what, if you approach entrepreneurship not just as a way to build a successful company, but as a way to think about solving problems and creating jobs while creating all kinds of good things in the society, I think we are very close to kickstarting a revolution here, the same way we did with the scientific method. And you know, the best revolutions are not the ones that happen overnight, that the ones that tiptoe in. It took 200 years for science to actually get into all the classrooms. Hopefully with technology and more people involved and the lessons of history, we'll get this done in like 50 years. So it's on you, the youngest people in the room, okay? I'm just saying. So this is kind of the reason I wake up in the morning. It's the reason that I do what I do, is the reason that I'm here, is the reason that I want to look into people's faces and kind of make sure that we are hearing and we are able to see the possibilities together of what entrepreneurship can offer, right? So it is from that perspective that I'm going to talk to you both about the research and my experiences. Any questions so far? I want to keep this interactive. The big part of the lecture is actually already over. The rest of it now we're going to learn together. You have a question?
Well, you mentioned the women. So why is it so that so small amount of women are still joining the entrepreneurship force? Is this also something to do with discrimination, or what do you think about it?
Ah, great. I'm glad you asked the question. You walked into my trap. Okay.
What?
You know why?
Well,
That is
I have some thoughts about it, but
you know that problem is only a problem in the developed world.
okay.
Right? All around the world, the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurship is women. I mean, you just go to Africa. They carry the economy literally on their shoulders for the most part, right? Women. 8 million brand new women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh in the last 25 years. Most of them illiterate. But their second generation Grameen families, the third generation Grameen family, the third generation is actually going to Stanford at this point. Right? So this is really not an issue in the normal sense of the word. We always think about, I mean, is there discrimination? Sure. Are there all kinds of hurdles? But as Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, says, I say that for all women and women entrepreneurs, we know how to suffer, right? And survive in spite of that. Some of those things that go into what is the guts of entrepreneurship, right? And if you give the if you open the door the slightest bit, like Grameen did, very, very micro, all of a sudden. So it's really not such a problem. And when we talk about the effectual principles, maybe we will get an idea as to why fewer women in the developed countries are involved. Even there, if you go to a place like the United States, where you have a lot of immigrants, and a lot of immigrant women will be entrepreneurs as well. So one of the reasons maybe women are not as much in entrepreneurship in developed countries is because maybe there is not that need or necessity felt yet. But we'll talk a little bit when we get to the effectuation principle, come to this particular question again. But for the most part of the world, right, that's really not an issue. So it's just something I noticed here, and so I bring it to your notice. But when you go to other places, there are sometimes more women than men who are in entrepreneurship courses, entrepreneurship program, but definitely in actually starting businesses for sure. So there's hope on that front as well. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, how do we actually learn this? What is the content? What is the method here? And it's not all worked out yet. I'm going to give you a glimpse of something that we have been working out over time, and hopefully we will have more content as we move forward, including content that teachers and educators and entrepreneurs in this room will add over time as well. But let me just tell you the story of effectuation to some extent. Okay, now, rewind, get ready, get practical, right? How do people start ventures? What's the first thing you do? Where's my idea man whose idea is not ready yet?
Come here.
Okay. So what's the first step? And this is how people think about business, right? Yeah. What's the first step?
Think what you want.
Aha, okay. What you want, and then what do you want?
I want to have a company who will give advice to analyze sport people to sell also sport shoes.
Aha, okay. So you have an idea already,
Yes,
right?
Not ready to.
It's not ready yet. So that's what is the problem, right? You have an idea, you're not sure it's brilliant,
Yes.
right? Okay, so the first step is you have to come up with a brilliant idea. Okay, I think your idea is pretty brilliant, and we'll talk about why. All right, what's the next step? You come up with an idea, what do you do next? Remember, this is just conventional wisdom. You wait and wait and wait to figure out whether it's brilliant, but assuming it's brilliant, and I officially call it brilliant now. Okay, what happens? What do you do next?
Talk to other people about the idea
Okay, what for?
to ensure that the idea is
Indeed, brilliant. Okay, I've said that already, it's brilliant. What next? What do you do next? Good point. You talk to people, because you want to validate the idea in some ways. So what would count as validation? What would convince you that it's a good idea, besides the fact that I'm just saying it's brilliant? So, you do market research, right? Why? Because you have to show there's a large market for it. That's how we know it's a brilliant idea, right? All right, okay. So now you kind of go talk to people and you have shown there is a large market for it. What do you do next? Why are you laughing? That's serious business, lady. Why are you laughing?
No, it's just because of the conventional way that we do it.
conventional wisdom. You caught that, did you? Right. It's not enough to write a business plan. You have to write a winning business plan. And this is the American method, right? All right. Winning business plan. Then what happens? You've written a business plan. What's next?
Fundings.
Yeah? What do you need?
Looking for fundings.
Oh, okay. See? Raise money. That's good. Venkat, okay, you got the check. Now what do you do, young man?
Next.
Yeah? Now he will look for customers. Spoken like a truly conventional entrepreneur. Now that I have the money, right? Buy a car? That's not a joke. If you say buy a yacht, that could be buy a car? You know, that's sad, right? You should go whole hog now. You have a brilliant idea. You've shown there's a large market for it. You've written a winning business plan. People have given you money. Now you buy, $500 bottles of wine and you buy a yacht, right? Anyway, hopefully you don't do that. You actually build and grow the venture. And once you have built and grown the venture, then what happens? The standard idea, the dream. I'm not here, I'm hearing noise. Cash out. Yeah. Go public, sell, cash out. Now the best part. Now what do you do? Enjoy. What does enjoyment mean for you?
Start a new business.
Oh no. What happened to conventional wisdom? Okay, if you don't know this, this is what you do.
The yacht.
Yeah. So I gave it away with the yacht, right? So you go off to the Bahamas. Okay. That's not how it happens, right? It's hardly any company that will actually follow this path. And even to follow this path, you have to do things before you get there, right? It doesn't just just by going and asking people, they're not going to tell you it's a brilliant idea and there's a large market for it. So it's something that you want to think about. What do experienced entrepreneurs actually do? So this was my research question. And I was particularly interested in the word expert, right? So not just people who are successful, because, you can just get lucky. So success by itself is not enough. So I actually was looking for people with a lot of experience, right? People who have started, they have 15 years experience, but they also have started multiple ventures, including successes and failures, and taken at least one company public. So this was the research question for my dissertation. And looked at these people. Only about 245 people fit this criterion. I wrote to all 245 of them, and 45 people accepted to participate in the study, and I got to do a really interesting study in the sense that it was not just that I interviewed them or learned about their businesses or anything like that. I actually put them through an experiment. So I got all of these people, I gave them a 17-page problem set. Students will appreciate this. So I actually got these experienced entrepreneurs to go through this 17-page exam, almost like a problem set, and I asked them to talk continuously as they solve the problems. And the idea was, if there are people who have built companies in completely different industries, and every industry you can imagine is there in that sample, how do you actually extract from them what is it that they have learned about entrepreneurship? Right? And the idea was, if you give all of them the exact same problems to solve, and you ask them to talk as they solve the problems, now you can look into their heads a bit. You can look at things like, what is the first piece of information they looked at? What is the second piece of information they looked at? What information did they ignore? How did they go from point A to point B? How did they make a decision? And I got a chance to get them to make all kinds of decisions, marketing and finance and hiring, and how do you deal with bad things that happen to you, and all of those kinds of questions. So Effectuation is really the name for all the findings from that study, which since then we have replicated with other samples. So we started with the expert entrepreneurs, right, who are very high in effectual thinking. And remember, I haven't told you yet what is effectual thinking, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But we replicated that study with experienced corporate managers who have no entrepreneurial experience. And we found that they were almost at the opposite ends of the way. Even though they all solved they all make decisions in marketing, in finance, and in hiring, and all those kinds of things. The fact is that the managers who have a lot of managerial experience but no entrepreneurial experience think almost in the inverse way of the experienced entrepreneurs. And then we went and looked at novices, right? Like the students here who may not have yet started a company, or they've started a company just a year old or less than 2 years old. And they were all over the place, as you can imagine. But the more experienced as an entrepreneur they had, the more they moved in this direction. Then we went and looked at angel investors. Does anybody want to know what is an angel investor? Should I assume, does everybody know what is an angel investor? No? An angel investor, unlike a venture capitalist, is just a rich person, right? Who makes their own decisions on how to invest, or which company to invest in, how to structure the deal, and all those kinds of things. And most of they think very much like expert entrepreneurs, because most angel investors actually have been experienced entrepreneurs themselves. So that makes a lot of sense, right? So now you go to like formal investors, venture capitalists and so on, and then we find that the venture capitalists with less experience actually think like the managers, but the more experience they have, the more they start thinking like experienced entrepreneurs. Then we also looked at organic growth leaders. These are people inside large corporations who have created a new revenue line, right? A new top line, as they call it. And they were thinking a lot like the experienced managers. So by this time, finally in academia, when you have done all this, people say, oh, maybe Saras actually, knows something, or her research was of some value, especially when there are 15 other people now who are working on it, and they are all beginning to find the same thing. That's what counts as validation in academia, right? So it became a group of researchers who started doing this, and most of what I'm going to tell you actually comes from the work of all these other people as well, not just me. If I say I, take it with a pinch of salt, okay? So we ended up writing about 200 case histories from different parts of the world, and even from different time periods like the 18th century onwards, right? So there's a lot of evidence that went into building what I'm just going to condense into 5 principles for you today, okay? All right, now, question again. How many of you already have read something on effectuation because you took a class or you teach? Okay, a lot of people here. So you can take us through the principles, right?
Right.
Yes? Sure? Okay. Anybody in this place, in this area, who has already read? Okay. Help us out. What is effectuation?
First principle.
Yeah. Now, not yet through the principles, but if you had to say what is effectuation, what would you say? Let me tell you, the reason I'm asking him this question is people used to ask me this question for the first several years. I had no answer. Right? Because it's kind of difficult to say what it is, right? But take a shot at it.
A way of thinking, approaching a new business.
Yeah. So.
Use the means at hand.
Yeah, use the means at hand to do something. Very, very good. Any more? What is effectuation? I just asked you what is effectuation without getting into the principles yet. Pardon? Yeah, actually get something done, which just starting with the means in hand to some extent, right? So this is what the community of effectuation scholars now have a much better way of saying what it is than I had been saying in the past, which is really that you just work with what's already within your control, right? To co-create the future. And now it's your own definition of what is important in the future. It could be starting a business, it could be solving poverty, it could be changing the government, however you want to decide, it's up to you. But the idea is you just start with things that are already within your control, right? And so you can see in the case studies, we have a lot of different case studies from around the world, and as I told you, different times. There are social ventures, there are other kinds of ventures, all of these, but we have a lot many more that data that we have collected on the stories of ventures here, right? So now, let's get to the principles. So you already mentioned that you start with means at hand, right? So we have this, and we're going to give this to people. This is your bird in hand, right? So we're going to have, and all of you are going to get, I feel like Oprah at this moment, Matthias, where are you? I feel like Oprah. I feel like, look under your seat, you know, everybody's got a bird in hand. So the idea here is to say we don't need enormous amounts of money. We don't need to be brilliant, right? You just start with, you know, who you are, what you know, and whom you know. And you may not even know exactly what you want, and that's okay. And you may not have a brilliant idea in the sense it may not be you know, huge market or the coolest new technology or anything like that. You don't need to. You just start, right? So you are ready. You're not going to wait for showing anybody whether it's ready or not. And we're going to talk about what do you do. But the idea here is just start with things that already are within your control. And remember, we're not even talking about money yet. This is just who you are, what you know, and whom you know. And I'll give you kind of an unusual example of this particular thing. How many of you have heard of the company Husk Power Systems? Probably nobody. Nobody from India here? You look vaguely Indian. Are you from India?
No, I'm from Lebanon.
Ah, okay. Good. Welcome to India then. You are my official Indian here. I'm just kidding. So if you're from India, everybody has heard of it. What Husk Power does, it actually produces electricity from rice husk. You know, the outer covering of the rice. Now, normally, farmers just discard that covering and they kind of collects like a little mountain along the side of the streets and it emits methane gas. But we know methane can be converted into energy, right? So this guy, Gyanesh, he was one of those people from a village that had no electricity in one of the poorest states in India. And he got the chance to go to engineering school. And he realized, oh my God, the stuff that's creating all the trouble in the village is actually something that you can create energy from. So he said, okay, I want to build a business, you know. Brilliant idea? Maybe. Because a lot of people thought that's not a very brilliant idea because it costs enormous amounts of money to build a power plant, right? Not to mention all the governmental regulations and the licenses, all that you have to do. And then if you actually manage to build a power plant and put it on the grid so people can have electricity, remember you're in a very poor part of the country where the regulations are not very strongly enforced for the most part. There are all kinds of problems like Maoists roaming the countryside, kidnapping people and stuff like that. So the fear was even if you actually put it on the grid, people are going to steal electricity. How do you get them to actually pay for it? So it seemed like an impossible task. So, and you can say this is really not ready. You know, it's a brilliant idea, no doubt, but it's only an idea, and how do you actually implement it? And what they did was, as you can see, this is a power plant. This is actually their power plant. What they did was they kind of went and said, what is there in the village that we can actually use to build a power plant? Because we cannot pay millions of dollars to get gasifier technology from the US or from Germany or someplace. We're just going to look at what is it that we can use. So things like used diesel engines, right? They started looking at things around and they actually kind of put this together, this machine, and said, can we actually produce it? They had lots of rice husk. That was free anyway, cost nothing. So they put that into the thing and it actually worked. Now they had to figure out how do you get people to actually pay for this thing. And so here was truly the stroke of brilliance. They actually looked at what is it that people actually want electricity for. Can you guess if you're in a poor village with no electricity in India and you have the chance of getting it, what would you need?
Water pump.
Water pump? It would be nice, especially the women would love it who have to every day go and get the water from miles away, right? True, important. But what's the number one? Can you guess?
Phone charges.
Who said that? You are a smart man. Plus, you always are saying he's the entrepreneur. So that's very good. Okay, excellent. Phone. Why do they want phones and they want to charge their phones? Why? Why is that even more important than water?
They can connect to each other.
They connect to each other? Is that what you mean?
They can connect to each other if they charge their phone.
Yeah.
To other entrepreneurs.
You said other entrepreneurs. But the answer is really the fact that now you can be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's
right? Because otherwise you have no livelihood, even the women, right? Now you can actually think about ways to solve the water problem, right? So the idea was really that people wanted phone chargers. So they immediately started thinking about phones, and then again, it's not a question of brilliance, it's a question of truly interacting with the people, seeing who you know and what do they know, and they start looking at this and they realized that, well, how does the phone company actually work in these remote areas? Well, they usually give you prepaid cards, right? That's how you pay for a phone. So they came up with a way for people to prepay for electricity. So in Bihar, now if you're in a village like this where you have husk power systems, you can actually just simply purchase power by prepaying it. You can say, I want, enough for a water pump and a sewing machine and, 3 chargers and 2 lights. Sometimes not even lights, because the kerosene lamp is still cheaper, right? So 2 lights and a fan, right? If you want to, you can actually prepay. They invented that system. They educated people to build all this in the village, and there were people who actually are in charge of keeping accounts and selling the cards and making sure, so when you run out of the prepaid thing, you have to, buy the new card, so the machine actually will run down, the meter will just cut the machine off, and these are called microgrids, right, and micro power plants. So they kind of invented the whole system, but none of it is like really brilliant or anything, because it's all worked with what is available in the villages. And as you can imagine now, people have mobile phones, they can start businesses, but this business itself is also creating employment and creating entrepreneurs, right? There are people who are in charge of building the thing, maintaining the thing, collecting the payment, maintaining the meter, all those kinds of things. So that's what they did. Now they are in about 1,000 villages. And their biggest problem is that there are power companies and, not power companies, phone companies that actually want to buy them. Why do the phone companies love them? Yeah, every village that they go to, they've opened up a new market for phones, right? So the phones, love them, and they also go electrify cities around the place where there are cell phone towers, because it's like a synergy there. That's what they're doing. So this is the example of bird in hand. But for those of you who want to think about it in a very simple way, you can just simply think about it through a cooking example, right? What does bird in hand mean? And how is that different from causal logic? And I use this example a lot, so you might have heard of this already, right? You can cook causally and you can cook effectually. How do you cook causally?
Use ingredients you want to have, or?
Yeah, you first start with, what is it that you want to cook, right? And then you have the recipe, you get the ingredients, how do you cook effectually?
You see what's in the kitchen and you use it.
Absolutely. So it's as simple as that. But this is a nice example of a real company doing something really interesting and complicated and large, makes a big difference, but it's the same principle to some extent. You actually say, what is it actually available here, and how can we solve the problem with what we already have? Okay? All right. Any questions so far? Yeah? Yes. Yeah. What if we actually teach everybody now? Everybody knows how to do it. Yeah, is that very?
Next effectuation chapter
okay. So as soon as you finish telling everybody about the other 4 principles, then we'll build the next effectuation chapter. Very good point. But the answer to that is, of course, right? It's not a question of is there. The question really is, somebody will come up with something, right? That's the whole point of it, right? The moment we have what we think is knowledge, we've also expanded the boundaries of ignorance, right? Because now we know a lot of things that we don't know, right? So there are lots of questions that come out of this. And so I think people are going to develop other ways, other things we don't really know. So come back to this question a little bit later again, right? And I remember there was a question in front that I have to come back to as well. So it's a good question to ask, and my immediate answer is, of course there will be other things. It is just that we are filling out the gaps on this one, and even in effectuation there is 1,000 things we do not know. And I'll talk about that too afterwards if you want. What are some of the things we do not know about this stuff, right? Okay? Going back to any other questions so far? Yes?
Yeah, good distribution is not always a good think there are many failures entrepreneurs than the successful entrepreneurs. So if we are encouraging effectuation this way, aren't we encouraging the intuition of entrepreneurs, and we are promoting more failure as much as we promote more successes, and so we are reaching suboptimal.
How well are you doing promoting success? How well are we doing so far promoting success? Are we doing very well?
In entrepreneurship?
Yeah. Do we know how to promote success?
We are progressing.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah,
you think the causal way will lead to more success?
Not necessarily, but the scientific way of Bacon, for example, was a causal thing. And that's why it is an efficient thing.
Correct.
Promoting an efficient thing optimizes you over a long time.
Correct.
Promoting an intuitive way of thinking.
Okay. Oh, there are so many things wrong with what he is saying. I'm like, where do I begin beating you up? But here. But the point is fantastic, right? So the first thing you want to think about is that the entrepreneurial method is not the scientific method, right? The scientific method actually got people to think more causally. You're absolutely right to some extent, right? But now we are in a different, this is a method like the scientific method, but this is a different method. This is a method for solving problems in the human realm, right? It's not about finding truth in the universe to some extent, right? Now, you are asking the question about promoting success versus failure, but before that, you also raise the issue, is entrepreneurship always a good thing? And the answer is, of course not. Is science always a good thing? We have more ways of killing each other more efficiently all at once than we ever had before in the time of Bacon, right? So the good and bad issue is whenever you talk about a method or an instrument or a weapon, however you want to think about it, that can be used for good and they can be used for bad. So there is no guarantee here that this is only going to be, used for good and it's going to lead to utopia or anything like that. In fact, in the early stages, the US government actually got in touch with us saying, this is very, very, interesting because this is how Al-Qaeda works, right? That we need to understand this thinking because now our enemy thinks very factually. We no longer have the beautiful, efficient, expensive machinery, the causal way of killing that was the army and armies to armies, state to state anymore, right? So you're absolutely right about the good and bad part of it. But now let's actually think about, are we actually promoting failure, right? Given that there's no guarantee of good and bad, right? So that question I want to keep separate from the failure issue, right? And so you actually think about this particular thing is, what is the role of failure in life and in entrepreneurship? Learning. So do you get your students to fail?
Yeah.
All the time?
All the time. Don't lose enthusiasm by failing and failing over again.
Okay, it's a good thing to think about. How do you promote success without promoting failure? That's really my question. If when you find that formula, get in touch with us, because then we won't need entrepreneurs anymore. We can just hand it over to the robots. Right? So the interesting lessons that entrepreneurs learn are that failure and success is not a 0-1 option. It's not that if you fail, then you don't succeed, or if you succeed, you will never fail, right? They actually see failures and successes in plural. You fail all the time. What you do is you learn to kind of outlive small failures and accumulate small successes. Eventually, hopefully, you have something called a big success, right? But the idea really is to use failure. In fact, the surest predictor of success is failure and what you do with it. And so we're going to look at some of how they do that, right? So when you look at how do they invest, right? When you think about the simplest form of failure, which is actually losing money, right? So when you think about it, normally, this is how we teach people to succeed, right? We say try to predict future cash flows, think about all the risks, calculate the risk-adjusted NPV of your project, and pick the project with the highest potential NPV, highest expected return. The experienced entrepreneurs learn a very different lesson. They actually say, ask yourself, what is it that you're willing to lose to do this, right? What is it that you can afford to lose? And how can you get it done for affordable loss? And the issue really is to think not about the upside so much, but about how are you going to control the downside. So the issue is, it's not that you will not fail, but you will fail in ways that are okay with you. And that is different for different people. And that's different for different life stages, right? You're 20, you say, what have you got to lose? You know, maybe you're 60 and you can ask the same question, what have you got to lose? You're 40 and you're worried because you have a couple of kids. Maybe you've got something to lose, right? But the interesting thing here is for each of us to figure out, even at 40, you can ask yourself, what is it that I'm actually willing to lose? What can I actually afford to lose to pursue this venture? So think about people who start a company, right? I teach at Darden. My students get obscene amounts of salaries when they finish, right? And still we have alumni who leave the job and start a company. Now, if they use this logic, right, you would expect them to see, oh, I'm making $200,000 a year. You know, let me think about my opportunity cost. Over the next 20 years, how much money would I make? And then my idea will have to be brilliant enough to show that I can make more money on this. None of them will ever start a company if they thought like that, right? How do you think they actually think about it? Do you want to take a guess? How do you think they would actually think about it? If you were thinking using affordable loss on that question, you have a job that pays you $200,000 a year, and you want to start a company, how would you use the affordable loss logic to actually start it? Who wants to take a shot at it? Use the money you earned already, and you're willing to lose all of it? Parts of it. I want the teachers to talk all the time. You don't look like your teachers. How would you do it? You have a $200,000 job. How are you going to make the decision to leave and start a company? You won't. She will not start a company. Okay, I'm hoping you are paying good money to be here. Otherwise, I don't know what you're doing here.
I'm not going to start a company.
So what do you want from today's session here?
Information, I don't know.
Okay?
Yeah.
So she will not start. Her affordable loss is infinite. So she's not going to do that. Can you guess how somebody does that? How do they think? Maybe you will never do it. How would you do that? I keep inviting more women, but the women have got to speak.
I think it's two things. Either you lose something, so is that, and what you gain from becoming an entrepreneur. So if it's
what do you think a person who's earning $200,000 a month, and they could continue earning that rest of $200,000 a year, what do you think they would be willing to lose?
they don't care about the money. It's about the mission that you have and the belief that you have in your company.
Okay, so it's okay. You're just going to leave the $200,000 job because you believe what? That this company is worth it.
That you can change the world or something.
You can change the world, all right? In the meanwhile, it's okay. You know, my spouse hates me and my children.
Because you believe you can bring something.
All right. Any other ways? How would you use affordable loss? Yes?
What's worth to get free?
Pardon?
What is it worth to get free?
Yeah, how can I do it for zero?
No,
Is that what you're saying? Or
zero, get free in my...
Okay. So you're actually saying, what is the opportunity cost of not starting a venture? It means I will never be free. I'll always be working for somebody, yes. Right? So you're actually thinking, but what do you think would be your affordable loss? So now I get the opportunity cost idea. So you don't care whether you're going to make a lot of money and stuff like that, because if you don't start a company, you have a cost to that, which is you will always be working for somebody else. You will not be free, right? But how do you think you would calculate your affordable loss? It's really not a trick question. Yes? Yeah. Absolutely. You don't really need $200,000 to take care of all the things you care about, right? So people will say, you know, I have saved up some money. I can afford to invest about $50,000. And they may even say things like, you know what, I am not really going to leave the company. For the next 6 months, I'm going to work nights and weekends. Or I'll say, I leave this job and I'm going to give it a year. because I have enough savings to take care of my family. Or maybe my spouse will go to work for a year, right? You're thinking about all of those things and say, I'm going to give it a year. But at the end of the year, I will decide. And what is the worst that will happen? Maybe I'll be back on a job market. I may not get a $200,000 job. I may get a $150,000 job. Am I okay with that? Well, let me talk to my spouse, and if both of us are okay, let's do it. Right? So it's that kind of logic. It's really not the heroic risk-taking logic that, no matter what. So the question really is, here is a way to deal with failure. You are controlling how much failure you are willing to live with. But you have to have some level. But as you get more experienced, you learn how to do it for zero. So let me give you a story, actual venture story. You want stories? Yes? No? So this is Mrs. Cheng from China. The richest woman in China, also considered one of the richest women in the world, billionaire, right? Started this company, built this company, 9 Dragons paper. Now, this is your brilliant idea. You are working in an import-export office, and you notice in the late 80s, right, that China is beginning to import more and more paper. And you ask yourself, why is China importing paper? Can anyone take a guess? Why was China beginning to import paper, like more and more paper every year at that time? What was happening in China and the world? Yes? Middle class grew, but what were the middle class doing?
They were learning, so I assumed they were printing books.
Yeah, they were printing books. That's why they needed more paper. That is a wonderful guess from an educational setting. But there was something much bigger happening in China. Running out of wood, maybe? Toilet paper. What was China doing? What enabled them to even build the middle class? Printing money. They started manufacturing, packaging, right? They were making stuff and sending it all over the world, but mostly to the US, right? So they were packing stuff, and the demand for cartons was going up like crazy. So as an import-exporter, she starts thinking, right, now we are importing this paper. It seems very expensive, and we are importing not to print books, right? Not even to print money. We are actually importing it to just make boxes, in which we are like making crap and filling it and sending it to the US, right? And I just came from China. I love them. I'm very respectful, but you should see some of the stuff that people buy in the US from China. So it's more a ding on the US than on China, by the way. But anyway, so she thinks about that, right? Now you have an idea. You think, what is the first thought that comes to your mind? We're importing so much paper, and it's all, cartons, and it's going to the US. What are some thoughts that will come to your head when you hear this, when you know this information? Why are we importing, right? But we know why we're importing, because we need to make the cartons. We have the answer to that one. So what's the business idea that jumps at you at this point? What are some questions that come to mind? You're importing, yes? Can we do it ourselves? Yeah, but we don't have enough paper. That's why we are importing. Pardon? Can I import it? Sure. But that's not going to solve the problem. Pardon? Yeah, the first question that comes to you is, what happens to all this paper? Right? If it is books, it's a different story. Maybe people actually use them and keep them. With cartons, what happens to cartons? What happens in the US once the stuff gets there? They throw it away, burn. I wish they would burn it. I mean, they actually just throw it away for the most part, right? These cartons just get thrown away. And so she starts thinking, if we could get the cartons back, we wouldn't have to import. Plus, it's also really good for the environment and things like that. And so she starts thinking, wouldn't it be great to build a paper recycling plant, a carton recycling plant, where we get the cartons back. Now, you have to get the cartons back from the US, you have to have a recycling plant. This is not an affordable loss project, is it? Right? And you're just somebody working in an import-export company. And yet she built this company for affordable loss, for less than $5,000 worth of yuan, actually. And it's a multi-billion-dollar company. So what she did was basically decided to, she said, I have to get at least one shipping container load of cartons back. And how do I do that? She says, the first thing is I should save up a little bit of money so that I can buy at least one container load. I want to show that it can be done, right? So you're not thinking multi-million-dollar paper cycling plant or something like that, but you're saying, can I get one container load back? That's the first thing. How can I do it for less? So she says, okay, I can go to the US. I have people there, and I do not know all the details of this story, right? Because I only know stuff from the English press, and I've asked my Chinese colleagues to actually tell me the details of the story. But roughly, this is the story. So she basically decides to go to the US, and you always have relatives and friends that you can stay with, right? It happens a lot to me. People show up at my doorstep and think they can stay for 6 months, right? People from families, and usually you have no way of saying no. So that's, it's not going to cost you that much. It's going to cost you the plane ticket to get there. But then once you go there, you have people that you can stay with. And then the first thing you want to do is not the Golden Gate Bridge, but you want to go to a trash dump and ask what happens to cartons, and can I buy one container load? And then they had this wonderful surprise. In the US, they are willing to pay you if you will actually take the cartons away, right? So instead of costing money to get those cartons, she actually gets paid to collect the cartons. And how do you bring it back to China? By boat, yeah, but how do you pay for that? Who said, who? If everybody speaks, yeah, yes, you don't.
Empty containers.
Yeah, the containers are coming back empty. The US ain't producing anything to send it back to China, right? Huge shiploads just coming back empty. And so you go out and talk to the people who own the containers or the shipping, and what do you tell them? You can do it, come on.
Can you ship this for me?
Yeah, so you don't want to say, can you ship this for me? Say, look, I have a great deal for you. Right now it's all coming back empty, right? I have no idea how I'm going to build the paper plant or anything, but right now your shipping is going empty again. What would it take for you to bring my stuff back? And I don't have money right now, but let's talk about, right? So you don't want to ask somebody, can you do this? And they can say no. You want to tell them, here's why you should do it, and now tell me what would it take for you to do it. That's the way you want to talk to people, right? So and the moment you do that, yes or no is not an option, right? What would it take? And some people will say, okay, what the heck? And you can say, what have you got to lose? Your containers are coming back empty anyway, right? So you also use the affordable loss principle by looking at what has the other person got to lose? Nothing much. It's not like it's dangerous, toxic stuff. It's just used paper cartons. Bring it back. So you could do it for nothing. As the business grows, of course, you can have a partnership and maybe give them a little equity or something like that. But at that moment, to show proof of concept, it doesn't cost all that much. Now you get it back to China, and you have to build the paper plant. And now you start thinking, for whom is this most valuable? And it turned out for smaller manufacturers who could not actually directly buy from the importer, who probably are buying from wholesalers. So she got a few small manufacturers of different things, anything that goes packed into the cartons, and they came together to build the first power plant, right? So because once you have a captive market here, if you could actually bring it back. Because for these small manufacturers, not having to buy from the importers and have much cheaper packaging gives them a competitive advantage going forward, right? And that's how they built the company. And it grew really, really fast. And it's not, it's not the coolest idea in the world. It's not tech. It's not even, gasifier technology from rice husk. It's the oldest import-export, and you can build a great business doing that, right? And you don't have to be the smartest person in the world with a lot of money or high technology knowledge or anything like that. All right, now, are you beginning to feel a little bit more comfortable about failure?
Yeah, I'm always comfortable.
He is always, that kind of worries me as well. Yeah, don't get that comfortable. It ain't nice. Failures, if you have actually been through a failure, it doesn't taste good, right? It's awful, actually, even if you lose what you only can afford to lose. But giving the control now takes away your reason saying, oh, I don't have the guts. Now the requirement for guts has gone down so much that unless you are a coward, it's difficult to say, oh, I really want to do this, but I can't do this because I'm afraid. You cannot do that much, right? It doesn't take huge amount of guts. It just takes enough of your desire being larger than the downside that you actually try to control in your hand. And it's not that big a deal. And you say, okay, let me at least do proof of concept, right? You can move to the next level. So that's what affordable does for you. Yes?
A lot of times when people talk about entrepreneurs, they feel that they're risk takers in general.
Yes.
How is that related to the affordable? How do you feel about that statement in terms of...
How do you think I feel?
I think I know how you feel. I was wondering how, because
Yeah.
I'm assuming you get that question a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So people think entrepreneurship, in fact, a lot of experienced entrepreneurs will tell you it's about risk taking, right? In actual fact, because I have the data, you look at how they actually make the decision, they're not taking risks in the normal sense of the word, right? But here is how you want to think about risk. First thing, we all have different levels, right? We all have different levels of risk taking. Plus, we are all different in what kind of risks that we will take, right? I know people who have no problem jumping off of a plane, but they will not invest in the stock market because they're afraid of the stock market, right? And I know people who would short sell in a bull market without batting an eyelid. They will never jump off of a plane. So risk is not a simple concept. For the most part, when you want to do the lessons that experienced entrepreneurs learn, is that risk is actually a set of values, things that you care about. Like a couple of people in the back said, I am worried about the fact that if I don't start a company, I will never be free. It's not that I'm a risk taker, but I think just continuing to work in a job that pays well is a risk, because then I don't get to achieve my dreams. So if you actually think about what are the things that matter to you in life, you will never risk the things that matter the most. In that sense, nobody is a risk taker, right? But given that you want independence, you want to follow the dream of an entrepreneur, now you can say, what is my level of affordable loss? And some people are comfortable leaving the job for a year. Some people are saying, I'm going to work only nights and weekends. And other people are saying, I'll do it only if my spouse takes a job and he or she is okay with my doing. So different people have different levels. So it's really, you might look at somebody and say, oh, that person is a risk taker. All your meaning is that's a risk you wouldn't take. It doesn't mean that that person is a risk taker. And that's the kind of understanding you learn as an experienced entrepreneur, because for years and years you do this, and you learn this not only about other people, not only about the idea of risk, but you actually learn this about yourself, right? And you get better at understanding what is the levels that you are willing to live with. Yes?
Isn't it also what we have been taught
Yeah.
during ages? I mean, we are conditioned to think in a certain way.
Correct.
And that is what society is made of us.
Absolutely.
If it's not taught in school, but it's not correct.
Yes.
If you go back into time, there's a minority that has the control
Yes.
over,
Everything.
everything. And they decide what we should do and what we shouldn't do.
Yes.
If you check out society today, why is it that more people are now interested in entrepreneurship? Because it has been blown out worldwide to invest.
Correct.
Try to do it yourself.
Correct.
So people are just like herds. Just if one person say this is the way,
Yeah.
everybody follows.
Yes.
And so we are taught that way.
We are taught that way, but nowadays we are also being taught that don't believe everything you're taught.
Exactly.
Right? That's the first step, right? Including the stuff that I am telling you, right? Challenge me, absolutely, right? So the first step to understanding and to knowledge is actually to take some ownership of the knowledge and not just follow rules, right? You follow rules after a while because in some ways the rules work for you, because you cannot know every single thing, so you rely on certain systems, but you never want to rely 100% on anything. In fact, a lot of the entrepreneurs will say, that is the biggest risk. You think the system will take care of you. Who is actually taking care of the system? Right? And that's you and me. That's got to be you and me.
Actually, we are.
Yeah, exactly. That's got to be you and me. It's got to be all of us. So at the end of the day, the real risk is actually taking things for granted to the extent that we think there is actual security in the world. right? But in actual fact, security is always earned, always fought for. Somebody somewhere is working to make it possible for us to have a job, make it possible for us to have roads, to have milk in the fridge, right? And that's really, and we have to do our bit. So those are the kinds of things entrepreneurs will talk about. You're absolutely right. And since you talked about how we just believe this stuff, and so a lot of people will think, one of the entrepreneurs that everybody will think, my God, he's a risk taker. Ever heard of Richard Branson?
Yeah.
Right? Do you think he's a risk taker? Yeah, he's a swashbuckling, he goes ballooning around the world or whatever, jumping off of planes, sure. But let me tell you a little secret that he shares with Mrs. Cheng, right? When he started Virgin Atlantic, the airline company, he was young, he had just started the record company was successful, and he has this brilliant idea, he's going to start a new kind of airline, Virgin Airline. Now, he could easily, convince a bunch of people to buy him a certain number of planes, or put his own money to buy planes, or write a business plan and get investors, or whatever, he could do all that. You know what he did? He called up Boeing, and he told Boeing, you must have a couple of 747s sitting in some hangar doing nothing. Right? What would it take for you to let me have one for a year, for 12 months? Because I have this great idea for an airline. And, if it works out, we'll talk about the upside, right? If it doesn't work out, well, I'll return the plane to you in the best possible condition. Does that sound like risk-taking to you? Yes and no, right? The risk he took is not putting the money in buying planes, because he has the money, or people will give him the money, and it's the best idea in the world, and he knows he can do it. That was not the risk. But he did take the risk of calling up Boeing. And, Boeing would look at you and say, like, first of all, he may be somebody well-known in the record business. As far as Boeing is concerned, he's like, who are you? Right? That's going to be there. So you're taking a risk in terms of, being seen as a stupid person. And I always tell my students, because my students have this huge, high GMAT, high IQs, and I tell them, in some ways that comes in the way. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. So the risk you take in some ways is saying, let me ask Boeing, what have I got to lose? Well, maybe they'll think that you're an idiot or something, but if you don't ask, you'll never know, right? So maybe you can think that he took a psychological risk or reputational risk or something like that. But it's not the kind of risk you associate with Richard Branson. So this is again these taken for granted stories from the press. And this, by the way, he himself says in a video interview, and we have that clip online if you want to take a look, by the way.
While you're saying that, it just jogs to my mind that most of the time, people fill in the gaps themselves.
Correct.
And that is the biggest failure.
Correct.
Because
why is it a failure? Think about that for a minute.
Because you don't know what the answer you're going to get, but still you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to get that answer, this seems silly, they're never going to do it because I'm a nobody.
Correct.
So you're just thinking all the possibilities yourself,
Correct.
not knowing what you're going to get.
Correct. So on the one side, some of that is history, some of that is society that makes us think that we are not capable, or people will think we are an idiot, and that's a bad thing. We are going against all of those things. But the other piece of it, let's be honest, it also allows us not to do anything, right? Just, it's just easier to get up on the bicycle and go to work or whatever and not to do this. So we have to face both sides of that equation, right? What history and society and systems have done to us, but also what we are doing to ourselves, which is we are afraid, and it's difficult to say, I still want to do it. And I want to do it enough that I'm willing to risk something for it, right?
It's not what you know, but what you do is what you know.
Absolutely. Everything about entrepreneurship is what you do and how you do it. But most importantly, that you do it. That you do is the key.
Yeah, just coming to this point is, so do you think that entrepreneurs have higher self-confidence in themselves? I mean, they can control better what they know and what they want to do, and so they don't care that much about the uncertainty that is going, but they just trust themselves. And so maybe they are...
It's a good question. Maybe they are just different kinds of people, smarter people, more confident people, braver people, all of those kinds of things. So I have said this before. I think it was in Sweden that I said this, and then the next day there was this website where they said, Darden professor from University of Virginia says any idiot can start a company. And what I'm trying to say is, one of the things we are going to see is, doesn't matter. Anybody can actually be an entrepreneur. And that's one of the most important messages coming out of this. And a lot of these people, when they started originally, right, they really were not that confident, or they did not know, some of them, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute. Let's get to the principle and I'll come back to you. You will see that they truly are people like you and me, right, when they start out. It is actually doing something and calling that person and trying to make that deal. That's what teaches you the confidence. So it's really, you don't have to wait for being the bravest person. At the end of the day, what I'm going to tell you is you have absolutely nowhere to hide. If you want to start a company, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do it today. I don't care, you have 4 kids, you're divorced, you're 40, and then, or you are a young person, you haven't finished. There's none of those are reasons for not starting. You can say, I do not want to start now. But you cannot say, I cannot start now because you cannot get away with this. You're not leaving the room with that answer in your mind today, right? You can choose, I never ever want to start a company. That's fine. But not because you cannot. Okay? So let's take a look at the next one. This is the most important one. And you will see this here, why everybody can be an entrepreneur. Because the successful companies are not built by one person. That's why it doesn't matter if you're not the smartest person, the bravest person, the man with the most resources, right? Because you're not going to do it alone. Every single day, this is what entrepreneurs do every morning. They go and bring in people who want to be part of what they're doing. They build a network of stakeholders. That's what they do on a daily basis. And so there's no question of saying, I can't do it, because all you really need to do is to find someone who can actually do it with you. And so you start with just who you are. It doesn't matter who you are. Remember, illiterate women from Bangladesh are doing it. Right? So you can start with just whoever you are at this moment, with all your constraints, and you ask yourself, what can I do for affordable loss? And you start doing it. And what do you actually do? You start talking to people. And you bring them on board. So here's the story. This is Big Belly Solar. So Jim Poss was a student at Babson, and he always wanted to do something about the environment, something in renewable energy. He was very, very, excited about wind energy, about tide energy, about geothermal, all those kinds of things. He was learning all this stuff, working with engineering students in Olin. Next door is the engineering college, and coming up with all these great ideas of how you could build renewable energy companies. He was writing business plans, winning business plan competitions, right? And every time he did this, he would win a business plan competition. And then when he actually sat down with the investor, they would say, well, it sounds great, but it doesn't seem quite doable. Right? So he keeps getting this thing over and over again, because, and normal people might think about this as, of course, my ideas are too complicated or too big or too grandiose, and so I cannot do it. But because people were asking and you're listening, you're saying, this doesn't sound doable. It's a lot of money to do this. The price won't work, the business model won't work, this won't. So he keeps asking, what is actually doable then, right? What is doable? And eventually, he goes back to his engineering guys and says, what is actually doable? Guys, what is it that we can actually do? And then the engineering guy says, well, we can put a solar panel on top of a garbage can, and it will be zero energy, because the energy it generates, you can use to compress the garbage down. Right? So instead of having 8 times the garbage collection, only once in 8 times the garbage needs to be collected. Now that seems a long way away from like wind and solar and geothermal and all those kinds of things. But this is doable. And you can do it for affordable loss, right? So they go out and literally talk to some people, it didn't look like this when they first built it, right? They just basically get metal containers from a metal shop. And they start putting a solar panel on, because they had enough money from the business plan competitions that actually led to no investment, but just they had some money from the business plan competitions. They put that and started making that. And the interesting thing was, every single person who said this cannot be done, that cannot be done, right? Jim was very good at keeping in touch with them throughout. So later on, as he builds Big Belly Solar, he says, look, we have done this and it actually works, and it is zero energy consumption, and it is, it's absolutely doable. People then say, oh, but that's kind of like, it's too easy or it's too simple. And then he said, okay, you want a business plan for a wind energy thing? Would you fund that? Right? And he has all this. So he keeps all these relationships going. And that's how he actually grows Big Belly Solar, right? People who do not want to invest in this venture, but they also don't want to invest in wind energy or whatever because it's too expensive. But now he's asking for like $20,000, right? He's not asking for $2 million. How do you say no to the guy? So the same people who don't want to invest in either one will actually invest with him, because what's the worst that will happen? What have you got to lose? This is something everybody can understand. You can sell a few of this and repay the investment. So he raised a lot of money along the way to grow the company by keeping in touch with the people who wanted to be in touch with him, but not necessarily for the venture. Right? So you think about building a network, and we say we are afraid to ask people. It's a risk because they may say no, or they may think you are stupid. And the interesting part of it is the people who say no to you are the ones who down the road actually think like, okay, why not? And so the idea that you can go out and ask people and people will say no, and that is the start of a relationship, right? The fact that somebody said no, because psychologically it's very interesting. When somebody said no to you and tomorrow you go back with a different idea, you've done something, you've actually accomplished something, it's much more difficult for them to say no, right? And in the meanwhile, you also keep in touch with people. So some of the things that you learn here are a lot of the stuff that we think we need, money, brilliant idea, and all these things actually come from other people, for each of whom it's an affordable loss proposition. But the key is every single day you're going to build these networks and you keep all these networks going, and we're going to look at that in a dynamic fashion in the next slide. But I want to introduce you to just two more principles as we go. And here is one of them that will address some of the issues that you already raised. I told you about the richest woman in China. Here's the richest woman in India. Right, this is Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. She built Biocon. And you think, how can you build a biotech company effectually? People ask me this question. And so I was very glad to hear this particular story. So Kiran actually had this dream. She wanted to become a brewmeister, right? She wanted to become somebody who is a brewmaster in a brewery. So she goes to Australia to study. People think, first of all, it's a very peculiar career choice, that too for a woman, and a woman from India. It's really weird. But her parents are encouraging, so she goes and she says, I want to become a brewmaster. Then after finishing the degree, she realizes that there is a glass ceiling. It's not easy to be a woman brewmaster. It's really, really difficult to be one from India. So the jobs are not working out. People are not willing to promote her. After a few years at this, she's completely like, okay, this is not working. And I'm going back to India. I have to do something else because this career is going nowhere. So she's kind of down at that point in time. She comes to India and she happens to know this Irish guy who has this company, Biocon Pharmaceuticals. And he comes to her and says, production is too expensive in Europe. I need you to produce this in India. I don't know anybody in India except you, right? So can you produce this for me? And she's like, what are you talking about? I know nothing about this. And he says, think again, right? You know yeast, right? And she says, yeah, like you know how to make beer. You know a thing or two about yeast, right? So he says, basically what I really want you to produce is enzymes. So start with enzymes and work your way up. And she said, I don't want to. She actually calls herself this reluctant, accidental, or she did not want to start a company. She wanted to be a brewmeister. And this guy kind of wears her down, right? Talk about a self-selected stakeholder. But it's because she doesn't have a job and she has nothing else to do and nobody really is giving her any. So she says, okay, I'll do this if you insist, right? Okay, I'll try, but it's on you. It's not my, And she starts doing this, and it's a multi-billion-dollar company again, right? So, and everything she has to learn along the way. But you have one good self-selected stakeholder, lots of doors start opening and you start learning together, right? Which is the last principle. we think that the future comes from all these clever people who predict what will happen next and who invent new technologies and who are, who have billions of dollars and they kind of make these big decisions on where to invest, whether they are private investors or government investors, and we think that's where the future comes from. Actually, the future just comes from a few people getting together and starting to do things that each one may have a different reason for doing it. Right? They have their own reasons, but by coming together, you can do something that you couldn't do yourself. So it's about co-creating the future. So the plane in the background is Spaceship One, right? It's a plane where they built it for $10 million. It's a spaceship. It has no computers on board. It actually has a pilot, and you use a stick shift to drive the thing. And it was built entirely by volunteers. That's why it was very cheap. And it won the X Prize. And all I want to say is history does not run on autopilot, at least not yet. Right? History comes from what you and I choose to do. So what entrepreneurs are in the process of doing, coming back to your point, is here's all the stuff that the world teaches you or the world constrains you all the thing. But your job is to remake that. Right? Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter which country, which ethnicity, which life experiences. And doesn't matter if you are from, your Paris Hilton, everything is handed out to you. But the fact is your job is to get up there, I always tell my students, is to say, how can I make this better? And you get to define better. I'm not telling you what is better. But the idea that you can actually co-create the future in ways that matter to you is the most important lesson entrepreneurs learn. And all these are just techniques of doing that without having to wait for the most brilliant idea, without having to wait for money, without having to be afraid of failure to the extent that you don't start, right? This is saying, I just start with things that are already within my control, and I can co-create the future, but the I goes away very quickly. Any questions so far? Because I'm almost done. What I'm going to do in the next few minutes is just to show you how this works over time in a venture, and then close with a couple of quotes from actual entrepreneurs. But before I show you that, I want to ask you any questions at this point, because there's one more exercise I'm going to put you through on the next slide. Yes?
What I was wondering, these are things, these are what questions. What do you have to do if you want to succeed in this? And what I was wondering, what about the mental state of somebody who's, for instance, there can be two entrepreneurs, and they're both following these rules.
Yeah.
One is successful, and the other is not.
Yeah.
It can be.
Of course.
What's happening then? It's about
chances are both are unsuccessful, but that's fine.
Principles of attitudes or things like that. That's also very. I heard for instance, the dream is important. To have urge to do this.
What dream did Kiran Mazumdar Shah have?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Her dream had nothing to do with what she ended up building, so she didn't have a dream.
Now, but in the end, you said you used the word dream. At the end, somebody has a dream. You want to do something.
Yeah, but not this.
No, not the principle.
Correct.
You want to achieve something in life, or have an urge for doing something. So there are basic principles of being proactive, or where you want to reach something, or if you want to achieve something. So there's mental states.
Yeah.
How do they affect on being successful in these type of principles?
Okay, so first of all, let us think about success one more time, right? Let's think about success and failure one more time. But let me ask you, what are the necessary conditions here? It doesn't matter who you are. You can be somebody who is utterly depressed, right? Start with that. You can be somebody who has a dream. You can be somebody who you don't have a dream anymore because you lost everything in an earthquake. It really doesn't matter. There's no...
Come into action.
Absolutely.
In one or other way. That's what I
What's the key word? Say it again so everybody can hear.
come into action.
You have to act. That's the only necessary condition.
Yeah.
Right? So you can go up and say, what makes me act? Well, what got you walking?
Yeah, I understand.
Right? And the issue really is, this is all we really have to do as teachers. And that is to actually say, get up and actually do something. Tell me what is the reason you're not doing it, right? Yeah. You can say, I do not want to do it, right? So you can always ask, so what do you want to do? And there's something they want to do. And the issue really is, can you do it in such a way that other people want to do it with you and will invest with you in one way or the other, whether it's with money or time or technology or whatever, and you start getting going. So there is no necessary condition. There is no assumption here that you're a confident person or you're a dreamer or you're passionate. You can be all of that or none of that, and you can still do it. So it's not a question of following the rules, it's actually a question of acting. And the first act is really the most difficult one. But once people actually start acting, the process kind of kicks in. So let me show you the process, right? You start with, who am I, what do I know, whom do I know? You're saying, given that, what is it that I can do for affordable loss? And you get to decide all this, nobody's telling you. And then you start interacting with people. And here comes, I thought when you asked the question, these are all what questions. I thought you were going to ask me, like, you need to tell me how. So I'll get into the how a little bit here. What you're trying to do when so I tell my students, this is day one, right? This is today. You have all of tonight to come up with this. Okay? Tomorrow morning, you wake up as an entrepreneur. And when you wake up as an entrepreneur, what do? You start talking to people. And when you're talking to people, what are you trying to do? You are not trying to just gather information. You're not trying to get them to tell you you have a brilliant idea. You're not trying to get them to tell you you have a big market. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get them to commit to something. And let's examine that through a little exercise. Shall we? Shall we do that? Okay, so you go out and you start talking to people. Like the conversation we had on the shipping container. Right? You get out and start talking to people. So to do this, I need a pen. May I use your pen?
Of course.
Looks like a nice pen, no? So I like to use this pen because this is my idea. In fact, this is our idea. We are all entrepreneurs for a minute. Think about this. All of us have an idea. This pen doesn't exist, right? This is just an idea in our head. I'm holding it up just for us to remember that we have something that we can do for affordable loss, given who we are. Okay? This is what we start with. And then you go out and start talking to people. Maybe you talk to a potential customer, right? You go and say, I have this idea for a pen. It's orange and it's transparent and it's really light and it's beautiful. Would you buy it? Would you invest in it? Would you make it for me as a supplier? You talk to different people, right? Usually when you go and talk to people, what are some of the reactions you will get?
A pen?
Pardon? A pen? Look at that face. Oh God. A pen? You want to make a pen? You do know it's 2014, right? Right? Sure. So you're going to get some use the iPad, right? But that's what is going to happen. Chances are not very high that people are going to say, oh, this is the best idea in the world. Here is an order for 100,000. Here's $1 million. Here, let me make the first batch for you. You're not going to get that reaction. You're going to say, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Don't you have anything better to do with your life, right? You're going to get all kinds of life advice, and especially if you start with someone they're going to say, basically what's wrong with you. But they're going to start telling you, why don't you do this or do that? And if you talk to a customer, assuming he's kind of a nice guy and he doesn't say, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in the world, go back to school or something. He's probably going to say, why are you making a pen, right? Nowadays, even if you're making a pen, you need something. You need technology, or you have to make it environmentally friendly. You have to make it green. So that's the kind of reaction you're going to get, assuming anybody has a positive reaction at all, right? So people start giving you advice. People start giving you suggestions, and now I ask my students, what do you do? And this happens to students all the time. It happens to actual entrepreneurs all the time, right? When you actually go out and start talking to people want something different than your dream. And the question is, how do you react? And here's the real issue of the how that we need to get to for all the principles. So let me return the pen back to you. So you get this thing, because nobody likes that pen, by the way. Yeah, well, but
I'm going to offer it to you.
Sure, I'll hold you to that. The interesting thing is, people are going to say, why don't you put a microchip in it, or why don't you, make it green, and all these ideas you get. So how do you react? So look at the possible reactions that you can have, right? The instinctive thing is to say, oh, that's my baby, it's my idea, that's the one, that's the idea that I want to build. If you don't want it, look at Steve Jobs. Would Steve Jobs listen to you? So I'm going to do this, my dream. I'm going to leave a $200,000 to do this is my baby, right? And so you say, I should persist. I should keep talking. I will keep at this till I find somebody who wants this thing and who will make it. That's one possible reaction. What's another possible reaction? What's kind of the opposite of that? Pardon? What's the opposite of this? Abandon the idea. Okay, that's an extreme reaction. It's a reaction I do not allow in class for the most part, at least for the duration of the class. You can always quit, or you can adapt, right? You can actually say, oh, customer thinks that putting a chip in the pen is a good idea, so maybe I should do that. So I change my idea. Right? I start thinking about a pen which has some technology in it, or I start thinking about a green pen, an environmentally friendly pen. And another reaction you can have is to say, oh, you can put a chip in it, you can make it green, you can make it yellow, you can do this, you can make it sing, and you get all these ideas from all kinds of people, because now you're doing market research, right? You get all kinds of things, put them all into a spreadsheet, and start calculating the competitive landscape, and start calculating the risks and how much investments and what the profitability is, what is the risk-adjusted expected return going to look like. This is something that MBA students love to do that, right? So this is another kind of reaction you have. And the experienced entrepreneurs, and I come to you, will actually say, you can do all of those things if you want. Each has pros and cons, but here's what I would do. What you would do is actually say, go back to the person and say, oh, so you want to put a chip in it. Why do you think a chip would be a good idea? And eventually in the conversation, what you're trying to get to is to say, what are you willing to do to put the chip in this idea? So that what are you willing to commit to change my idea? What are you willing to do to enact your vision of my idea? Right? The people are only going to commit to their dreams of your idea. They're not necessarily just going to commit to your idea. Right? So you're really getting them to think about, now if someone says, I know this manufacturer and he already is experienced in putting chips into little plastic items, I can introduce you to that person because I think it's a good idea. Now you can actually start, because that's not just information, that's actually action to some extent, right? They're telling you that they're willing to do something, and you actually get them to do it. And to the extent that somebody commits something, you change your idea. So this is what happens. If you go back to this thing, every time somebody commits something, you get some new means, right? You have new resources, because now you know a supplier which you didn't know before. This person is introducing you. So your resources start increasing a little bit, but the venture also becomes about two people, because the customer is going to introduce us to the supplier, so the two of us are together are going to call him to some extent. But it also now, we are no longer talking about our dream pen, we are talking about this thing with the chip in it. And so there will be some constraints on what we can do as well, that some things change, right, to the extent that the commitment actually works. And along the way, some surprises will come as well, good and bad. And that will change both bird in hand and affordable loss. But eventually, if enough number of people make enough number of commitments, you end up building something that maybe nobody in this process actually knew what this would be, right? But now, think about it. What will happen if this actually failed? Each person only invests what they can afford to lose. So several people will lose different things, but each person is only investing what they can afford to lose. So the idea here is this process, to the extent that it works, is highly likely to lead you to something innovative, something new. You don't have to start with an innovative idea, right? You start with a pretty mundane idea, stupid little pen, right? But by talking to somebody and that person introduces to somebody and they change, and then he's actually able to do the prototype. Now that you have the prototype, maybe you can go to an investor. Maybe you can go to your old classmate who is very, very good at the technology and say, oh, here's this guy, he knows how to put, now do something really cool with this thing. And it may not even be just the chip in the normal sense, it could be something completely different. It may not be a pen anymore. Right? It's because you suddenly have the idea of the chip in little things and all those. So all of this is much more likely to lead to innovation. That is, if it succeeds. And if it fails, it's going to cost less in terms of failure. That's all. The failures are smaller and they're spread out. So it's not about the probability of success. Right? It's not that you're more likely to succeed. The idea is if you succeed, you're more likely to succeed very big because you're going to be innovative. But if you fail, it's affordable loss anyway, right? So here's what experienced entrepreneurs will tell you about failure. They'll say, and I'll give you a soundbite version, right? A, you're going to fail all the time. Get used to it. That is the stuff of success. And so they'll say, this is what you need to know. You're going to fail a lot, so it's failures in the plural. Keep them small. Kill them young, don't fail alone. That's it, right? You know, you want to fail small, fail fast, and you do not want to fail alone. Why? When you fail together, you have failed, but the relationship actually gets stronger. And you have other possibilities because your network has increased so much. If you have failed through affordable loss, but your expanded cycle is huge at this point. And you're already moving towards innovation. So you live to fight another day. You do things, all right? Okay, we have only 5 minutes left. And I do not want to end our time together on my voice. So I'm just going to give you 2 quotes from actual entrepreneurs. One is a little video clip, and the other is just a quote that I will read, okay? So the first one comes from, and a lot of this stuff gets sent to me by people. I have all kinds of video clips and things that people send me, but I always use this one just because it just captures every principle of effectuation as though the guy took notes and did it. But he had never heard of me or the effectuation or any of the research movement or anything. It's a Danish entrepreneur, Klaus Meyer. He has built 9 different companies relating to the food industry, and he started as a cook because he loved to cook. He describes it very beautifully. He says, I grew up in Denmark, and I had no idea what food tasted like until I actually went to France as an exchange student, and then I realized, okay, this is what food is supposed to taste like. And so he decided to become a chef. He makes this joke. And he has devoted his life to kind of changing the whole idea of Nordic cuisine. And now they have Noma. I mean, he's been part of all of those things. But he started as a chef. And as a chef, he started realizing that if he has to do something important and not just be yet another chef, you have to understand business a little bit more. So he decides to go to Copenhagen Business School, and he graduated from there. And so Copenhagen Business School keeps bringing him back to talk to their class, right? And the students in the class had read a little piece on effectuation which told the cooking story that we talked about, right? That how do you cook causally and how do you cook effectually? So one of the students decided to ask him. It seemed like a good question to ask Klaus Meyer, right? So here's the question they asked, and here's his answer. Try to listen to the principles, right? Because in the real world, people are not going to use any of these words that I'm using, and I am perfectly happy if you never ever use the word effectuation in your life, by the way. That's just an academic thing. So long as you kind of understand what this is about, which is that you can actually help shape the future, that you don't have to wait for the most brilliant idea, you don't have to wait for money, you can actually go after the dreams that you want to go starting today, right? So long as you get those ideas, I don't care if you never use the word effectuation or anything like that, and he definitely hasn't had. But at the same time, the principles are useful, a way to think about it and see if you can hear them, okay? Okay, here we go. Oh, it is not playing. I am sorry, that happens sometimes. Because I think we changed the thing around. Okay. Let me do this. I can do it. Don't worry. I've been through. The first rule of technology is don't depend on it.
settings. Those should be
Okay.
Only this one is still finish.
Yeah, no, the mouse is a little sticky, that's all. Okay, so do you have the file that I sent you earlier? Yeah. I'm sorry, just hold on, it's worth it. Trust me. Okay, I opened the wrong file. Very good. Yes, it's working.
And your first question, that was even more difficult to say anything intelligent about. How would I partnership with the cooking? Well, there are many similarities, I would say. The way I love to cook is without a recipe and without any fixed plan. I love to come to some place in Hungary or wherever and see which vegetables do we have, what is growing in the garden, do we have any meat, what is in the fridge, and then, dancing a little, wondering how could you do and what could you do and do you know anything, and kind of, interfering a little bit with the surroundings. And that is also how I do businesses. I mean, I listen to people. I talk to my employees. If I have a dishwasher who is very good at flowers, then I should be dead if I didn't ask him to do the flowers. And if I meet somebody in my life who wants to build a dairy, and if we did it together, it could be greater, then I will be attracted. And so the way I build businesses is also the way I cook. I dance around and see what happens and try to feel the energy. But I'm sure that there are maybe more brighter ways of doing it. But from my perspective, it is very much the same thing.
It's interesting that the entrepreneur thinks all they're doing is dancing around and it's instinct and intuition, like the question that came.
When we go look at the data and you look at all these entrepreneurs who have built companies in many different industries, and you look, that is a method to the dancing, right? It's not very simple dancing. It's kind of the waltz, and you have to learn and you have to take lessons. There is a systematic way in which they are doing, but our job is to just actually get the learning from that. What they have learned through experience and they think is instinct is something actually that's learnable and teachable. So, and I'd like to now give you the quote from Pierre Omidyar, founder of eBay. So here's what Pierre Omidyar says. Almost every industry analyst and business reporter I talk to observes that eBay's strength is that its system is self-sustaining, able to adapt to user needs without any heavy intervention from a central authority of some sort. So people often say to me, when you build a system, you must have known that making it self-sustainable was the only way eBay could grow to serve 40 million users a day. Right? Well, nope. I made the system self-sustaining for one reason. Back when I launched eBay on Labor Day '95, eBay wasn't my business. It was my hobby. I had to build a system that was self-sustaining because I had a real job to go to every morning. I was working as a software engineer from 10 to 7, and I wanted to have a life on the weekends. So I built a system that could keep working, catching complaints and capturing feedback, even when Pam and I were out mountain biking, and the only one home was our cat. If I had had a bank check from a big VC and a big staff running around, things might have gone much worse. I would have probably put together a very complex, elaborate system, something that justified all the investment. But because I had to operate on a tight budget, tight in terms of money and tight in terms of time, necessity focused me on simplicity. So I built a system simple enough to sustain itself. By building a simple system with just a few guiding principles, eBay was open to organic growth. It could achieve a certain degree of self-organization. So I guess what I am trying to tell you is, whatever future you're building, don't try to program everything. 5-year plans never worked for the Soviet Union. In fact, if anything, central planning contributed to its fall. Chances are central planning won't work any better for any of us. Build a platform, prepare for the unexpected, and you'll know you're successful when the platform you built serves you in unexpected ways. That's certainly true of the lessons I've learned in the process of building eBay, because in the deepest sense, eBay wasn't a hobby and it wasn't a business. It was and is a community, an organic, evolving, self-organizing web of individual relationships formed around shared interests, right? And as a kind of a picture to leave you with, the standard way we have been teaching entrepreneurship, right, is to tell people that you have to find the gap in the market, and then you have to come up with, like the most efficient, great plan, and you have to execute on that plan and fill that gap in the market, and that's how you become successful. But notice that the market is given, right? The world is given, and your job is to kind of fill the gaps. This is a zari quilt from India, right? And the way they do this is it's usually a bunch of women, and it's usually not a single woman, a bunch of women. They all come with different baskets that have leftover fabric from stuff they have been stitching, and they start putting it together. And in the early stages, you kind of don't even know what that is, right? Somebody just gets started because they thought it is a nice looking thing, and they start, and slowly it starts coming together, and now it begins to have, a color scheme, a kind of aesthetic of its own, and you have to become a little bit more careful how you do it, and eventually, and the way they do it, they'll sing songs, and they'll cry and laugh and curse their husbands and gossip about the women, or, it's all part of the entrepreneurial process, right? But at the end, you end up with something that's beautiful, but also, if you're in a village in India, it had better be useful as well, right? This has to keep you warm, and that's what entrepreneurs have learned to do very well, that you don't need a lot of money or brilliant ideas, just leftover fabrics will do, right? Stuff that is affordable loss that you can throw away, you can start with that, and you can start building something, and as you build it, and sometimes you have to rework and rebuild and things like that, but along the way you end up building something that even you yourself couldn't predict what that's going to look like, except you kind of know it's going to be worthwhile, because you're going to keep worrying about the things you care about and the things that stakeholders care about, and it is going to be valuable because you are going to get it to pay, right? It's going to be financially and otherwise sustainable as well. And that's kind of the picture of expert entrepreneurship, what you learn through years and years of doing entrepreneurship. If you're interested in more information on this, we also created an open website where there's a lot of materials, including that video from Richard Branson, and a slightly, perhaps a little different version of the slide deck that I used. Everything is there, and I'm happy to even send this slide deck. There's more material there. There are stories, there are games. People around the world, especially educators and entrepreneurs, have created all these materials and put them up there. There's even a nice video clip of Steve Jobs talking about, that why he is not afraid of failing, because he's not afraid of asking. He says, I'll pick up the phone and ask people. And people usually never say no to, they've never said, they've always been helpful. And so I try to be back. So when people call me, I'm very helpful. And like, is this Steve Jobs talking? Really? We got all that. You can take a look at it. And there's a lot of material, things like that. And then Matthias and Ruud here have also brought some of the published books that are there. If you want to take a look at it. So we have all this. But I'm actually kind of going to leave this website for you. It also has my email address, and leave it here. I hope it was worthwhile. If nothing, at least you're warm. You're not cold out in the thing. So I hope it was worth your time. And it was absolutely a pleasure and honor for me to be here. Thank you. Can you guess what this is? I promised you, you're not leaving the room saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I cannot be because, right? So we are giving you your bird in hand. Right? It actually kind of signifies that you already have the things you need to start a great venture, for-profit, non-profit, social, whatever you care about. And all you have to do is to be yourself. Start with who you are. But it's also, you have no excuse to say, I don't have a brilliant idea, I don't have money, I'm afraid, all of those things. But it has another meaning as well. It's actually produced by disabled people. People who have far fewer resources than we have in every sense of the word, starting with the physical, right? So here's your new no excuse gift, right? That I promised you, like Oprah, everyone gets one. So get your bird in hand, and if you want to build a great venture, don't hesitate. And even if you don't want to build a great venture, go ahead and become a self-selected stakeholder of someone else who is building a great venture. So you have no excuse even if you don't want to build a venture, right? So get started. I just want to leave that with you. So why don't I do this? Let me give it to this man who made all kinds of faces at me here.
Sorry.
So where do they get one? As they leave, they get the... Yeah, on the way out, they have a box.
But we have still some time when we have some urgent questions.
Oh, sure. I am here. I can hang out and talk all day. The key is to get me to shut up, actually.
Small questions. We have some minutes to answer questions.
Sure. Any kind of questions, discussion. Absolutely. Yes?
I have a question. I will assume that we can teach this method or this way of thinking.
Yes.
But how could we measure the effectiveness of this teaching, this kind of education that we give to people?
Okay. So it's a great question. Like, how do we know we are teaching the right thing or we are actually teaching well? How do we measure it, right? It's a good question. Are you an educator?
Well, I used to work for the public administration in my hometown in education projects.
Okay.
I would like to write my master's thesis in entrepreneurship.
Okay, you just got your master's thesis project. Come up with a measure. Right?
No, I don't know. Well, I mean,
You don't know, ain't no answer, right? So the question really is to think about how would you do that. I mean, there are some measurements out there and I can point you to that, but this is where the next step in effectuation comes, that question that I said I would answer, which is really that there is a lot of work to be done here, right? So there are people who are beginning to measure. We have some measures that we have used in the research that you can just adapt into your classroom, but the issue really is for us to say, again, start with who you are, what you know, and whom you know, and who, same thing for your students, right? So if you're measuring something in a classroom in the Netherlands, in a master's classroom, is very different from if you're teaching, you know, in first grade in South Africa, which they're trying to do. They're teaching entrepreneurship at first grade in South Africa, and they're building the curriculum. So in some cases, we have some existing measures, but there's enormous work to be done yet. And I would place a bet, if I have to, that is absolutely measurable, right? So the question is, you really have to start with who this person is today, what they came into the class with, and you have to have some ways of actually teaching them something and then testing them again. This is a standard way you develop measures in any kind of education. And there are people who are beginning to use those methods from education to apply it to teaching effectuation. So I can point you to some resources of measurement, but there's also a lot of work to be done to be more creative in the way we measure as well. So it's A is doable, but it's also, there's enough work. If you want to do something creative with it, here's your opportunity. All right? Yes?
Have you identified the process of, is the acquisition turned to be effectuation? Is it situational? Is it
correct? Excellent question. The fact is, you can use techniques from everywhere. Right? There's nothing here that says that you have to be effectual, and if being effectual is the only way to build a great company or anything like that. There are pros and cons, right? So not even causal and effectual. You can think about the 2x2. There are pros and cons to using a very persistent, visionary, heroic strategy. There are pros and cons to using a very adaptive, flexible, agile strategies. There are pros and cons to being, you know, doing all kinds of analysis and planning and coming up with the best possible business plan and building it causally. And there are pros and cons to co-creation and effectuation, right? So there's no, you can mix and match. So I know, for example, a lot of people who will start with bird in hand, use affordable loss, but actually write a business plan. Because they get an opportunity to present to an investor, and it happens the investor actually says yes as well. So there's nothing here that says you should not do this or you should not. But there are pros and cons to doing it any which way, right?
But you see the dominance, there is a dominance for one style over the other.
Correct. So, yeah. So in all the data that we have collected, right, the more experienced the entrepreneur, the more effectual they are, and the more effectual they say you should be, right? So you saw Klaus Meyer saying, right, I would not, you know, make a plan and everything. He saw how he would do it. So the dominant, most of the people, most entrepreneurs, experienced entrepreneurs, most of the time will be effectual. So that's why we conclude, not necessarily that it's the best way to be, but these are the lessons they have learned. by doing it years and years and years. But it doesn't mean that you never ever do causal. Remember, one of the first things you will do as you start growing your business, you might get a partner who is very, very good at business, because once you have opened a new market, to scale up that market, I told you about Jim Pass. He went out and raised a whole bunch of investor money, and he had to write business plan. So it is good to know that when the time comes. And even if you yourself don't use causal strategies, you're going to have partners who can do that for you. Same way, every time you make a commitment, somebody makes a commitment, you make a commitment, you have to deliver on that commitment. To deliver on that commitment, very often you have to be very causal. So absolutely, you have to use all these strategies. But in the early stages, what I call 0 to 60 miles per hour, right? Getting the venture, you put the key in the car ignition and it fires and get it out of the garage. For that, experienced entrepreneurs overwhelmingly prefer effectual strategies. Why? Because they don't believe that there is a market out there that you can predict. They truly believe the future is fundamentally unpredictable. That's the lesson they learn. Does that help? All right.
Okay, thank you, Saras. Because
Yes?
of the time, this room is occupied in an educational setting, so this room will be occupied in some minutes by another event. Again, thank you. I have some logistic things. First of all, in your bag you find a voucher where you can 25% off of these titles in the bookshop in the central hall. And there's one thing to mention. This day was made possible by a lot of students of hospitality management. And when you see them, be nice to them because they do it voluntarily for their study. And when you leave, you also get a questionnaire if they did a good job or not, and if you can make improvements or not. So maybe they can hear it from me, so I want to have a big applause for our students who helped us organizing this event. Then some small logistics. When you move out, you get the bird in hand. You get a questionnaire in the central hall. There we have coffee and some small lunches for you standing ready. Saras will join the ring also for discussion. We have some pillars with the principles of effectuation standing there, so you might have go to one of the pillars and have this discussion of the day, because when it's arrived, everyone brought a small object according to one of the principles, so you may have your discussion over there. And hopefully, when you leave the building, get safe home, and thank you for coming here.
So can I remove this now?
Maken.